August 30th, 1941, 10:47 a.m. A German radio worker in Athens sits at his Lorenz teleprinter machine, feeling very frustrated. He's just spent 4 hours sending a 4,000-character secret message to Berlin for long hours of perfect focus. And now Berlin radios back. Message messed up. Send everything again. The worker makes a choice that will lose Germany the war. Instead of resetting his secret code machine the right way, he simply flips it back to the starting spot and begins typing the exact same message again. Same words, same order. But here's what makes this moment so special. The Lorenz machine creates slightly different secret code patterns each time, even from the same starting spot. 2 identical messages, 2 different secret codes sent within minutes of each other. 600 miles away, British radio workers intercept both messages. They have no idea what they've captured. The secret jumbled text sits in a pile with thousands of other intercepts, waiting for someone to notice the impossible luck. And they might have never noticed at all, except for one thing. A young codebreaker's girlfriend had just complained that he worked too much and never paid attention to details anymore. This is the story of how a relationship problem, a lazy German worker, in Britain's most secret base broke the code that Hitler believed was totally unbreakable. The Lorenz cipher, a code so complicated that the Germans called it Geheimschreiber, the secret writer. A machine so advanced it made Enigma look like a child's toy. By mid-1941, Britain had done something amazing at Bletchley Park. Alan Turing and his team had cracked the German Enigma machine. Thousands of intercepted messages were being decoded daily, giving Allied commanders amazing knowledge about enemy plans. But British intelligence officers noticed something worrying. High-level German military communications suddenly changed patterns in 1940. Messages between Hitler's headquarters and his army group commanders disappeared from Enigma intercepts completely. These weren't tactical battlefield messages anymore. These were big strategy orders, commands for entire army groups, battle plans involving hundreds of thousands of troops. The traffic was still there. British radio interception stations picked up the radio signals, but the secret code was completely different. Not the familiar electrical rotors of Enigma machines. Something else, something much more advanced. Colonel John Tiltman, Britain's best code analyst, examined the intercepts at the government code and cipher school. The signals came from a teleprinter system, sending secret text at high speed. The code changed with every single letter. Not every 3 or 4 letters like Enigma, but literally every single letter produced a different code pattern. Tiltman calculated the math possibilities. An Enigma machine had about 159 quintillion possible settings. This system? The number was enormous, with 12 rotors instead of Enigma's 3 or 4, and each rotor having a different number of pins that could be set in on-off positions. The possible key combinations exceeded 10 to the power of 19 possibilities. To put that in perspective, if every person on Earth tried 1 million guesses per second, it would take longer than the age of the universe to test every possibility. Intelligence reports suggested Hitler used this system only for communications with his top field marshals. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, had been planned using these channels. German strategy for North Africa flowed through this network. The entire German high command talked through these unbreakable messages. Britain was strategically blind at the highest level. They could read tactical Enigma messages about individual units, but had no view into Hitler's grand strategic plans. And unlike Enigma machines, which the Poles had given blueprints for before the war, British intelligence had absolutely no idea what this machine even looked like. This is where that girlfriend complaint becomes really important to our story. John Tiltman worked 16-hour days at Bletchley Park. His social life had disappeared. His girlfriend, whose name remains secret in British files to this day, finally confronted him in late August 1941. The complaint was simple but hit hard. You're so focused on work that you've stopped noticing details in anything else. You walk past me without seeing me. You become obsessed. The accusation hurt because Tiltman knew it was partly true, but it also sparked something in his thinking mind. Was he missing details in his work Because he was exhausted? Were there patterns in the intercepts that fresh eyes might catch? He made an unusual decision. Instead of looking at new intercepts himself, he began reviewing old material that had been filed away, specifically messages that seemed routine or boring. The rejected pile, the intercepts that younger analysts had thought were uninteresting. On October 28, 1941, nearly 2 months after they were intercepted, Tiltman found 2 messages from August 30th. Both came from the same German station in Athens. Both sent to Berlin within a 30-minute window. Both were about 4,000 characters long. The coincidence was surprising. German military rules demanded different code settings for each message. 2 messages of identical length from the same sender at nearly the same time? It broke every security rule. Tiltman laid out the intercepts side by side. The secret text was completely different as expected, but something bothered him. He began comparing the patterns of the code itself, not trying to break it, just watching the structure. Then he noticed something amazing. At certain spots, both messages showed similar math oddities. The frequency of certain letter patterns was too similar to be random. It suggested that underneath the different code, the actual message might be identical or nearly identical. Tiltman knew what this meant. A German worker had sent the same message twice using the same machine starting position, but creating different secret codes. This was like finding the Rosetta Stone for codebreaking. But what they didn't know was just how lucky this moment truly was. The specific mistake the German worker made would only reveal the cipher's weakness if the message was really long and if certain math conditions lined up perfectly. This combination would happen naturally only once in about every 10 million transmissions. Tiltman put together a team of 6 code analysts. What they needed to do was called a depth attack, a technique where 2 messages encrypted with related keys are compared to reveal patterns in the code system itself. The work was incredibly boring. Using just pencil, paper, and basic letter counting, the team began with a simple idea. German military messages followed predictable patterns. They started with common German military abbreviations. Number for message number, KKKR, which was German radio workers' shorthand for certain phrases. For 3 weeks, the team worked in 12-hour shifts. They make a guess about what a certain spot in the real text might be, use that to figure out what the code key at that spot would need to be, then test if that key pattern worked for other spots. Progress was painfully slow. By November 15th, they had decoded about 40 letters out of 4,000. But those 40 letters proved they were on the right track. The message was indeed German military communication, talking about supply shipments to Rommel's Africa Corps. Then on November 23rd, a breakthrough. One of the younger code analysts, a Cambridge mathematics graduate named Peter Erickson, noticed that certain spots showed the code key repeating in predictable gaps. Not the same key, but patterns in how the key changed. Intervals of 41 letters, then 31 letters, then 29 letters. These were prime numbers. The code machine used wheels with different numbers of positions, and they turned at different speeds. The German engineers had carefully chosen prime numbers to make the wheels cycle through their combinations as slowly as possible before repeating. But here was the weak spot. Because the wheels moved at math-related speeds, if you knew the wheel sizes and could find where in their cycle they started, you could predict the entire key pattern. By December 10th, 1941, Tiltman's team had figured out both complete messages, 4,000 letters of German high-level communications sitting decoded on a desk at Bletchley Park. But the real prize wasn't the message information. It was the math structure they had revealed. They now understood the Lorenz machine's logical design without ever having seen the physical machine. The machine used 12 wheels. 5 were key wheels that created one pattern, 5 were chi wheels creating another pattern, and 2 were motor wheels controlling when the chi wheels moved. The code at each position was created by mixing these patterns using binary addition. Understanding the machine's logic and actually breaking messages in real time were completely different challenges. What Tiltman had done took 6 weeks of hard work for just one message. German high command sent dozens of these messages daily. Britain needed a factory solution. This is where one of history's most brilliant engineers enters the story. William Thomas Tute, a chemistry graduate student who'd been recruited to Bletchley Park in 1941, not for his math genius, but because he was good at crossword puzzles and word games. Tute took Tiltman's work and asked a question nobody else had thought of. What if we don't try to decode the message at all? What if we just figure out the machine's will settings and let that tell us the key? It was a radical flip of the problem. Instead of attacking the code, attack the machine setup. If you could determine the starting positions and pin patterns of all 12 wheels, creating the key stream became easy. Then decoding was simple binary math. Tute developed a statistical method based on letter frequency counting. German military language used certain letters far more often than others. The letter E appeared roughly 17% of the time. By studying the coded output and applying statistical tests, Tute could make educated guesses about wheel positions. However, the real breakthrough came when they finally solved that problem. Max Newman, a mathematics professor working at Bletchley Park, realized that Tute's method required doing the same calculations thousands of times with slightly different numbers. This wasn't a job for humans. This was a job for a machine. Newman approached Tommy Flowers, an engineer from the Post Office Research Station at Dollis Hill in London. Flowers was an expert in telephone switching systems and had done pioneer work with electronic valves, what Americans called vacuum tubes. Newman explained the need. A machine that could read secret teleprinter tape at high speed, do binary logical operations comparing the tape to created key patterns, count specific letter combinations, and do this fast enough to test many-wheel setups in reasonable time. Flowers listened, then said something that shocked everyone in the room. I can build that. It'll use electronics, not mechanical switches. It'll process 5,000 letters per second, and I'll have a working model ready in 11 months. Every engineer in Britain had told Newman that such a machine was impossible. Electronic valves were unreliable. They burned out all the time. Building a machine with hundreds of valves would mean constant breakdowns. The calculations needed were too hard for electronic circuits. Flowers disagreed on every point. He'd been experimenting with valve technology for telephone exchanges. He knew that valves failed mostly during power on when the heat stressed the parts. His solution was smart. Never turn the machine off. Keep the valves at steady temperature, and they'd run reliably for months. Tommy Flowers returned to Dollis Hill and put together a team of engineers. Working with a budget so small that Flowers partly paid for the project from his own pocket, they began building what would become known as Colossus. The machine was huge. It stood 7 feet high, 16 feet wide, and 11 feet deep. It had 1,500 electronic valves in the first version, later increased to 2,400 in later models. For comparison, most contemporary electronic devices used fewer than 20 valves. The engineering challenges were huge. The machine needed to read paper tape moving at 30 miles per hour without tearing it. Flowers built a specialized sprocket system that pulled the tape through 5 reading heads at once, using light-sensitive cells to detect the punched holes that showed encrypted letters. Each valve circuit did binary logic operations, and OR and XOR gates that compare the input tape to internally created patterns. The machine would count specific combinations and show the results on neon display panels. Workers could then adjust the created pattern settings and run another test. The first Colossus started working at Bletchley Park on February 5, 1944. The timing was critical. D-Day was 4 months away. Allied commanders desperately needed intelligence about German defensive preparations in France. The machine's first real task was decoding a message intercepted on February 4th from Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's headquarters. The message was 5,000 characters long. Manual methods would take weeks to break. Colossus processed it in 4 hours. The decoded message revealed German assessments of potential Allied invasion beaches. It confirmed that Hitler believed the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. This intelligence directly influenced Allied deception operations and the final success of D-Day. By June 1944, 10 Colossus machines worked around the clock at Bletchley Park. Each machine had a feminine name, Colossus 1, Colossus 2, and so on. The machines worked together, with different colossi testing different, while setting combinations for the same message, dramatically cutting the time to solution. The Colossus operators were mostly women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, known as WRENs. They got minimal explanation about what the machines did or why. Their training focused entirely on operating procedures, how to load tapes, set switches according to written instructions, record results, and maintain the equipment. Security rules forbade them from discussing their work with anyone, including other WRENs working different shifts. The machines proved amazingly reliable. Flower's prediction about continuous operation was correct. Valves rarely failed when kept at steady temperature. When failures did occur, the modular design let engineers swap circuit boards in minutes rather than hours. But here's what makes this achievement truly remarkable. Colossus wasn't just the first electronic programmable computer used in warfare. It was arguably the first programmable digital electronic computer, period. The ENIAC, often credited as the first computer, didn't start working until 1945, but Colossus remained secret for decades, so its place in computer history was hidden. The machine used if-then logic, ran programmed sequences of operations, and could be changed for different tasks by flipping switch settings and plug configurations. By modern definitions, it was a computer. Yet Tommy Flowers never got public recognition during his lifetime because the Official Secrets Act wouldn't let him reveal what he'd built. The intelligence gained from breaking Lorenz intercepts, codenamed Tunny by the British, provided unprecedented strategic advantage. Unlike Enigma, which revealed tactical and operational information, Lorenz messages came directly from Hitler's Supreme Headquarters to Army Group commanders. These were strategic orders affecting entire theaters of war. General Dwight Eisenhower later stated that intelligence from Bletchley Park shortened the European war by about 2 years. While this assessment included all code-breaking efforts, historians now recognize that Lorenz decrypt specifically gave intelligence that Enigma could never access. For example, in July 1943, Lorenz decrypts revealed Hitler's complete battle plan for the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Soviet commanders, who got carefully cleaned intelligence from British sources, positioned their defenses with perfect knowledge of German attack directions and timings. The resulting German defeat marked the permanent shift of control on the Eastern Front. Throughout 1944 and early 1945, Lorenz decrypts tracked German military positions across Europe with amazing detail. Allied commanders knew division locations, supply status, and strategic reserves with detail that seemed almost magical. German generals later expressed confusion at how Allied forces repeatedly appeared exactly where they were weakest. By war's end, 10 Colossus machines ran at Bletchley Park. The British had processed tens of thousands of intercepted Lorenz messages, creating an intelligence advantage that German commanders never understood they were giving away. What makes this story particularly sad is how completely it was hidden after the war. In late 1945, Winston Churchill personally ordered the destruction of most Colossus machines. 8 of the 10 were taken apart and destroyed. The remaining 2 were moved to the government communications headquarters, where they continued secret work until 1960. Every person who worked on Lorenz code-breaking signed the Official Secrets Act. They were forbidden from discussing their work, not just with the public, but with their own families. Tommy Flowers couldn't explain why he'd spent 2 years of his life building mysterious machines. The WRENs who operated Colossus couldn't tell their children what they'd done during the war. John Tillman died in 1982. His obituaries mentioned his work at Bletchley Park, but couldn't say his actual achievements. William Toote lived until 1992, spending most of his life as a mathematics professor in Canada. His groundbreaking code analysis remained secret until the 1990s, long after similar work would have earned him international fame. Tommy Flowers struggled with money after the war. He'd spent over 1,000 pounds of personal money building Colossus prototypes, equal to roughly £50,000 today. The government first refused to pay him back because he couldn't document what the money was spent on without breaking secrecy laws. He finally received £300 repayment. The story only became public in 2000 when British intelligence finally declassified the Lorenz code-breaking operation. By then, most of the key people were dead. A rebuilt colossus now works at the National Museum of Computing at Bletchley Park, built from photographs and surviving technical papers. The ideas that broke the Lorenz cipher remain basic to modern code analysis. Statistical analysis of secret data, automated pattern finding, and using computer power to test many guesses at once. These form the basis of today's code breaking. But perhaps more importantly, this story shows a truth about complex problem solving. Breakthroughs often come from unexpected places. A girlfriend's complaint about inattention led Tiltman to review old intercepts with fresh eyes. A German worker's laziness created a weakness in a theoretically unbreakable system. An engineer ignored expert opinions about valve reliability and built a machine everyone claimed was impossible. The Lorenz cipher was mathematically stronger than modern encryption systems still used today. If that German worker in Athens had simply reset his machine properly on August 30th, 1941, the code might never have been broken. The war's outcome could have been very different. Hundreds of thousands of lives potentially depended on one person's decision to take a shortcut. This is what makes military history fascinating when you focus on technical problem solving rather than battles. The outcome of World War II wasn't determined only by generals and soldiers. It was also decided by mathematicians with pencil and paper, engineers building impossible machines, and a random crossing of human error with human brilliance. If you found this story interesting, consider this. The British weren't the only ones breaking supposedly unbreakable codes during World War II. American code analysts faced an entirely different challenge in the Pacific. A Japanese cipher machine called Purple that encrypted diplomatic communications using a principle so unusual that nobody first believed the machine could physically exist. That story involved a language barrier, rotating telephone switches, and a breakthrough that came from analyzing not what the machine encrypted, but the physical sounds it made during encryption. But that's a story for another time. If you want to see more technical problem-solving stories from military history, the engineering, the innovation, the human cleverness under impossible circumstances, subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment telling me what type of wartime technical problem you'd like to see explored next. Communication systems, engineering challenges, prison camp innovations. The next story is already being researched, and I promise it's equally amazing.